Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to today's webinar on intellectual property and how you can leverage it for business growth. Um, we are joined by Osler's JN, who is an excellent IP lawyer. We're super grateful to have him on this webinar with us. And then after JN tells us all about that, we're going to cover a little bit about how Pocketed can help you actually fund that IP protection work. So lots of exciting things today. And let's get started. A quick reminder that we are recording the session and the recording will be made available afterwards. We also absolutely encourage questions in the Q&A, and we'll save some time at the end to answer those. So please keep them coming. And we also just love a good chat on a webinar. So if you have comments and things going on, we'd love to hear where people are joining from and what made you sign up for this webinar. So we are thrilled to have you here today, and I will pass it over to JN.
Hey, thank you, Aria. Thank you very much. Jean-Nicolas Delage, JN for short, partner at Osler. I've been practicing in IP for about 30 years now, mostly around IP strategy as it relates to startups and scale-ups. I've actually worked with over 1,000 startups throughout my career, through all stages of growth. So I'm going to try in the next 15 to 30 minutes to actually give you real life examples from the trenches of what we mean about like creating and generating value using intellectual property as a tech company. I always start by telling my clients the exact same thing. The reason IP is important for you is because the underlying value of any technology is actually intellectual property. Because the different intellectual property laws give you a bunch of little monopolies that, when grouped together, actually generate that value. So in order to sort of understand why the underlying value of any technology resides in the IP, it's good to go back to what actually IP is. So if we can go to the slide that has like the different types of IP, that would be super appreciated. Thank you very much. So sort of to level the playing field, and so we understand what we're talking about, there are basically 4 to 5. There's a fifth IP right that I'm going to discuss rapidly, but these, what you have on screen, are basically the top IP rights that apply to any technology and tech company. So, for example, if you're developing software, and I'll just use software as an example, when you generate code is actually, since 1988, a literary work protected by copyright. So for a copyright lawyer, for an IP lawyer, code is like Shakespeare. There's no difference. It's a literary work. And if you are the owner of copyright, which is, I understand, the second right on your screen, but please bear with me. If you are the owner of copyright, you are the only one that has the right to reproduce, copy, so on and so forth, that code. That is the little monopoly that is afforded by the Copyright Act. If you develop software, though, the underlying methodologies and algorithms might be inventions protectable by patents. If you own a patent, and to own a patent, we'll cover that later on, but to own a patent, you need to actually apply for registration of a patent in a given country. And you need to describe your invention to the world within your patent application. If you do that, though, well, you will have the right to exclude everyone else from using, making, or selling your invention. So you see, you're already sort of combining two different types of rights to have to generate more IP value around your piece of technology. So copyright, you're the only one that has the right to reproduce the code. Patents, you may have the right to exclude others from using, making, or selling the underlying methodologies, algorithms, and whatnot. I'm going to go to the extreme right of the screen. When you have an invention, actually, one of the things you need to decide is, am I describing the invention to the world in a patent application in order to get that little statutory monopoly? Or should I keep things as a trade secret? A trade secret, fun fact for an IP lawyer anyways, there are no laws in Canada dealing with trade secrets. There's a Patent Act, there's a Copyright Act, but there is no Trade Secret Act. A trade secret is merely something that derives value from the fact that it is secret. So ask me as an IP lawyer if I like co-working spaces. The answer is no, because it's hard to keep things secret. There's people popping around your cubicle and asking, hey, what are you doing? Can I help? Whatever. Very difficult to keep things secret. Doable, but not that easy. But you need to keep things a secret in order to have value as a trade secret. Before I get to trademarks, and I'll do that in a sec, the only other piece of IP that's interesting that is missing here, which is mostly relevant in the hardware 3D space, the configuration of what we call in my world a useful article. Think juice bottle, think water bottle, think also though configuration of the iPad. All of that can be protected by industrial design, which is a bit like a patent. You need to apply for protection of an industrial design, but it protects the configuration of a useful article. So I'm going off screen for a sec just to pick up this. I would bet some money that the configuration of this bottle is protected by industrial design. I no longer use this because I've read articles on microplastics and it gives me the creeps. Fun fact for an IP lawyer anyways, you may or may not remember that a couple of years ago, all the big handset manufacturers were suing each other. Apple was suing Samsung and so on and so forth, because these little devices are basically the merger of computers and cell phones. Everyone owned different patents on these different components, and they were all suing each other. The biggest victory, though, was Apple versus Samsung in Germany, where Apple sued on the industrial design for the iPad, won, and actually won that suit. That was their biggest victory, and Samsung needed to change the design of their Galaxy whatever at the time. Last fun fact on that, their line of defense, again, industrial design is a bit like a patent. It needs to be a novel design, so on and so forth. Samsung found an old Star Trek episode from 1967 or 68, where Captain Kirk was walking around with a device that looked like an iPad, and they were claiming, hey, this is not a new design. It was used in Star Trek in the 1960s. Fortunately or unfortunately, the judge did not buy that argument. But again, if you have a piece of hardware that could have an interesting design, it is another piece of protection that might be interesting for you. And last but not least, trademarks, which protects your brand. You don't have to register a trademark. You literally don't have to register anything except a patent if you want your invention to be protected by patent. If you do not register a trademark, though it might be hard to enforce, if you do register a trademark, you have a monopoly coast to coast on the brand on a country by country basis. So Canada is coast to coast, and you have the right to exclude others from using a confusingly similar brand, basically. Moving on as time is flying. All right. So 30 years of practice, over 1,000 startups that I've worked with, and I sort of boiled down what you need to know, and you can go to all the little icons. Yeah, thank you very much. I sort of try to take 30 years of experience and summarize everything, and I think I can do that in under 10 minutes, as follows. The first thing you need, IP will either help you create value for the reasons that I've just explained and others that we'll get into in a sec, but it can also destroy your value. So the first thing I tell my startups, all startups that I work with, say, hey, do you really own what you say you own? And that's sort of the legal protection icon on the screen, where by contract, you do need to make sure that you own the different pieces of technology that are developed for you. Again, technology is IP. For an IP lawyer, it's humans that develop the IP, that create the IP, that invent. Might be AI at one point, but right now it's mostly humans. So I, as a lawyer, need to do the legal gymnastics. I start with whoever worked on the technology, and I see your slide deck to investors where you say, this is our technology and this is why it's great. Okay, so what legal hoops am I jumping through to make sure that you literally own those pieces of technology? By the way, we do that typically, obviously, by making sure that the people that work on the technology sign intellectual property assignment agreements. In the world of intellectual property, which are intangibles, an assignment is like a sale in the world of tangible goods. You sell a car, you assign copyright, you assign inventions. So you always have a comprehensive IP assignment signed by the people that work on the technology, or you have the appropriate license, which is a right to use that someone grants to you, either an open source license if you're creating code, an exclusive license from a university if your startup is based on a university technology. But you need to make sure, though, that you have all the appropriate rights to grow your business as you intend to grow your business. I'll just tell you a couple of common pitfalls, especially those of you that are literally starting on your entrepreneurial journey. I've had situations where I had a few co-founders, and some of them were still employed by someone else, which, by the way, makes complete sense. Not everyone wants to start a new business day one and abandon what pays for rent and so on, the food and so on and so forth. The issue with that, though, is that oftentimes, obviously, those people will have employment agreements. Those existing employment agreements will have IP language, and sometimes that IP language is super broad and actually captures what you do on the weekend for your startup. So your startup does not actually own what it says it owns, because one of the co-founders, everything that person was working on is actually captured by an employment contract with someone else. This happens from time to time. I've had situations where literally we've had to go to HR of multinationals and tell them, hey, I mean, I'm working with my cousin on this new startup. She has an IP lawyer. He reviewed my employment agreement with you. Apparently, the language is super broad and captures the 4D bingo game that we're doing on the blockchain for my grandmother, whatever, which I thought was not related to my employment. But again, apparently the IP assignment is too broad. Can we change it so that I can demonstrate to my cousin that when I'm working on the bingo game on the weekend, I'm fine, it's mine, it's not yours. So that has happened from time to time. So just make sure that you own what you say you own. Then the other question becomes, and that's going to tie neatly with what Arya will discuss. Once we own what we say we own, and we're documenting properly our usage of open source, our usage of data, we can demonstrate that our contractual agreements relating to data are fine. We can exploit the data we're using for our commercial needs. Once we've done that and we've sort of avoided common pitfalls, then we're going to turn to the value creation side of the equation. And the question is going to be, what kind of IP do I need? What kind of IP portfolio do I need to build, and why? And how much is it going to cost? So I'm going to go back to software because that's an easy example, but it's the exact same situation for hardware, for any kind of technology that you're working on, biology, hardware. Software is an easy example, and I don't have a whole lot of time. So The first, as I said before, when you're writing code, it's protected by copyright. That's literally automatic. You do not need to apply for registration of copyright. It exists. So nothing to do except making sure that you actually own the copyright. So again, you have the proper assignments and all of that. After that, certain aspects of your technology are going to be patentable, or we're going to be able to keep them as a trade secret. And I always tell my clients, if your first dollar goes to product development, your second dollar goes to product commercialization. If we're taking 10 cents from that to put on patent protection, and the time that it's going to take some of your people to literally work on the patent application, we're going to find a goddamn good reason to do that. So the why of building any kind of IP portfolio, to me, for a startup that's going to raise capital and eventually exit, that why is always what kind of IP assets are going to generate the most value for shareholders, meaning you as founders, value that we're going to try to extract at the time of the exit. So it's really understanding. So copyright is easy, automatic. Other pieces of technology, do I patent or do I keep as a trade secret? Those are the underlying sort of questions you're going to ask yourselves. And if we're going to patent and spend the money to do it, why are we doing it? Why do we believe that we will generate more value with a patent portfolio versus keeping things as a trade secret? All right. And we may stick to that slide. Yeah, you can stay there. I'm just gonna tell you a couple of stories, and then I'm gonna pass the mic to Aria. I tell all of my clients the following: you live in the Matrix, you just don't know it yet. Okay, The Matrix is a 1997 movie. I was already an older gentleman at that time. Some of you were not that old, but I figure, The Matrix, you understand that at the end of the first movie, Neo understands and sees reality for what it truly is, and understands that his perception of reality and actual reality were the two completely different things. In the world of patents, I translate that into the following. If you had the proper set of lens, because you're not Neo, insofar as I'm aware, but if you had the proper set of lens, you would easily and readily understand how your own innovations fit in the patent ecosystem in which you're going to go and play, what your competitors own in terms of patents, who is suing who for patent infringement, what's the scope of potential acquirers if you project yourself 10 years in the future and someone has actually bought your company. What these entities, these bigger companies that may buy you, what's their patent portfolio like? Do your own innovations sort of fill a gap into their own patent families? You would understand all of that. Obviously, you're not Neo. These lenses do not exist. What do exist, though, and we can take advantage of some of the grants that Aria is going to talk about to drill into this. What does exist are patent landscaping tools that can easily give us that information. In the olden days, which was like 6-7 years ago, I would tell my Matrix stories, and then I will tell my clients, go play in Google Patents for the weekend, go find what your competitors own and all of that stuff. That was hard. No one was doing it. Then these patent landscaping tools came about, and I was like, all right, easy. So in an instant, we can generate the Matrix. I can tell you what the competition looks like, what potential acquirers look like. I can tell you the patent litigation landscape anywhere in the world. If competitors are being sued, I have a U of T PhD student last year. We did that exercise with her. She called me 10 minutes after having received the results, and she was like, Jan, Intel is suing all of my competitors. And we were like, what? And this is not a bad piece of information to have, by the way, because Investors are going to know at one point because they use the same tools. They're going to ask you if Intel is suing your competition, is it a problem for you? And the good news is it wasn't. We knew why and we could explain why. This is all great information for you to possess and sort of understand and can build storytelling to investors with. All right. Once you have that, so this is competitive intelligence through patent lenses. Once you have that, you can start making correlations even between appetite by investors in your space for patents. You may have a competitor that has raised a Series B and maybe have 20 patent families in 20 different countries. You may have a competitor that has raised a Series B and has 0 patents. These are all valuable data points that we'll start using to make a determination between what are we patenting and where, and what to keep as a trade secret. Once we've decided to patent certain features of your innovations, we need to do patentability searches. That's going to cost you about $5,000 to understand. And I know we're being recorded. I'm just using these numbers, by the way, for general budget purposes. Things might change, but just to give you an order of magnitude and also to give you an idea of why and how these grants that Aria is going to mention and discuss might be important. So we can do patentability searches using these different grants, which otherwise would cost you about $5,000. And using some of these grants, we can literally apply for patent protection. So to give you a sense of how much that can cost, a decent provisional patent application, in my world, that's typically the first application we put on file. It's an incomplete patent application. We do that in the US. That's going to cost you approximately, a good one's going to cost you approximately $15K. We need to complete a year later, that's an additional $5K. And in 18 months after completion, we need to go into national countries. The whole process is going to take you minimum 5 years. And will cost you, unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But hopefully by that time, you've had the grants, you've raised money, you can pay for all of that. Through the patent landscaping that we do and other data points, we have a story to investors as to why we're spending that money, why it's generating value for you as a shareholder, but for your investors as well as a shareholder. And then we go about creating that value around different pieces of intellectual property for your company. I'll leave it at that because Aria wanted to talk. Maybe under 30 seconds for trademarks. Trademarks are interesting. At one point, you'll need to apply. You can use the grants for that as well. It's much less expensive to do availability searches for trademarks, to file for registration of a trademark in the key jurisdictions where you're going to be conducting your business, let's say Canada, US, Europe. The whole process will take about 5 years also, and it's going to cost you less than 20K approximately. But you should, if you haven't done it yet, I urge you to take your brand as you are using it and go verify yourself on a website called uspto.gov for United States Patent and Trademark Office, trademark search. Search your own brand to make sure that someone else doesn't own something similar. Super important. I have too many startups, honestly, that have not done that, did not want to spend the money on searches, did not search themselves, and received lawyer letters from Chicago, Switzerland, just because they went live with their website and their brand. I mean, it's not perfect. I call that sort of a red flag exercise. At one point, we'll hire professionals to do professional searches, but please do the minimum, which is going yourself, USPTO database. If you see something that you think is problematic, give me a call. Aria, on this, I'm letting you discuss these grants, which are great to drill down into a lot of what I've discussed.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It was super informative. We really appreciate that. I can see some people with hands up and questions. Just a reminder, put those in the Q&A function there, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. Do you want to go to the start of the grant slides, please? Yeah, IP funding, great. So Pocketed is a platform for finding government funding, tax credits, loans, competitions, and other business incentives. And today we're going to highlight a little bit about how your business can access IP funding because even those kind of lower numbers like 5,000 and 20,000 that Jan's throwing out can be overwhelming for a lot of startups. And so the good news is the Canadian government is investing a lot of money right now into IP funding that is very, very accessible. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So just generally in Canada right now, there's over 1,800 grants that are currently open for small to medium-sized enterprises. And of those, just over 1% are specifically for intellectual property. And so that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that each one of these grants actually allows you to fund about $100,000 in IP funding pursuits, it very quickly becomes worth learning about. So grants, this is like kind of the most common misconception here is really what do grants fund and how do I access that funding? And so what we always say is that grants fund activities. So right now, the Canadian government is focused on these activities that you can see on the screen right here. So it's environmental and sustainable practices. So green tech, clean tech, all of those things, absolutely. Commercialization, training, workforce development, a lot of wage subsidies exist. A lot, we never hire without a hiring grant. So we always say there's obviously exceptions, but still. Infrastructure and capital investments, there are some, especially if they're in strategic areas. Canada's very, very much into infrastructure and capital. Advanced manufacturing currently is a big focus. Agri-tech, research and development, export and international expansion, both of which can cover IP funding, and then collaboration and partnerships. So those are examples there. So let's explore a couple of programs here. The first up is one of my favorites. It is IPON. So it's Intellectual Property Ontario. Each startup or small business, medium-sized business can get up to $100,000 out of this program, and you can do it over several different chunks of money. So you don't have to go for 100K all at once. You can start with 20K and then move up. It covers 80% of your legal costs, which is quite great. So basically, if your first tranche of work is $100,000, you'll get $80,000 back. You do need to apply to the program before you engage your lawyer and before you start that work. But we're happy to help you apply for this, of course, and on our platform, and everyone here will get a code for access to our platform at the end. You can find out more about how to apply. So this is for companies based in Ontario. Up next, we have a very similar program out of BC. It's Innovate BC. Unfortunately, the uptake in BC was very, very fast. And so they ran out of money just a couple of months after the program opened. We hear through the grapevine that it's likely that there'll be more funding for that particular bucket in spring of next year. But we do suggest that if you are a BC-based company, we're going to see a couple of alternatives. But if you are a BC-based company, want to be monitoring this for the spring of next year, because they did get snapped up really quickly. It's actually available in Ontario, in Alberta, in Saskatchewan still, but it is completely allocated in BC. This one is actually very, very similar. It's kind of a different tier of the previous one that we saw. And so all provinces, not all, most provinces have kind of a version of this. And that's one of the things that our platform does is you answer a quick questionnaire and it will show you the IP programs that your company and you are eligible for. So you don't have to sift through ones that, you're not based in Ontario, you can't apply for IPON, and kind of vice versa. This is, I would argue, a little bit IP adjacent, but really important to understand. And so MyTax you can think of as a hiring grant or a wage subsidy where you work as an employer with a PhD student, a postdoc, and an academic advisor. You build a relationship with them. MyTax kicks in one-to-one matching. So for every kind of dollar you put in, they put in $1, 2-to-2 or 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 matching. So sometimes you put in $1 and MyTax puts in 3. So it really depends. The important part about MyTax is that this is an example of where you would want to call JN and say, how do I make sure that the work that I generate through this MyTax grant, we own the IP at the end, and how do we work that out? And MyTax is actually negotiated on a case-by-case basis with most universities. They're very familiar with it, but it is an important question to be asking as you kind of access these other grants and you work with a university lab who can really kickstart your innovation and development at a hugely discounted rate. We need to make sure that we're also taking care of those IP considerations throughout that process. We do have a MyTax webinar coming up. So if you're interested in learning more about MyTax, we'd love to tell you about that too. IRAP is another great program. IRAP's been around since I think the 1940s. So it's primarily a mentorship and advice program. And I would say at Pocketed, we got it wrong at first. And so we really approached IRAP as a funding source. And when we changed our attitude and we approached it as a mentorship and guidance source, a lot changed. And so IRAP is really interesting. You give IRAP a call, and if you meet their criteria, you want to talk about your innovation and technology, you need to have T4 employees, and then you're probably IRAP ready. You can give them a call, and if you are eligible, they'll set you up with what's called an ITA, an Industrial Technology Advisor. Advisor is really the key word here. And all of the funding that IRAP has actually flows through IRAP, through your ITA, and to you. And so it's very, very important that you start to develop a relationship with your ITA and tell them about your needs, get advice. But IRAP also has IP funding. So if you're in BC, you're developing technology, you have T4 employees, pick up the phone, call IRAP. And then once you get an ITA, talk to them about their own IP funding, which is very similar to the IP funding I've described before, where they pay about 80% of that. And so it is, yeah, a really, really great program. So I highly recommend. They also have funding for so many other things through IRAP, development and innovation, design, computer security, sales and marketing, a ton of programs offered through IRAP. So it's not a single grant. It's a whole program that has a whole bunch of different grants and programs, and of course, access to really fantastic mentorship and advice. Our ITA actually made our alpha launch of Pocketed successful. He got all of the companies that he was working with to be early alpha testers, and we couldn't be more grateful. How to set yourself up for success. So I have a couple more minutes. I'm going to talk about this. Tip one, like anything, you know, fortune favors the ready. So it's research and preparation. This is a big problem with grants. You can go to the next slide there. Thank you. Where, you know, in order to be ready, you do need to have a roadmap. You need to understand the deadlines that are coming up, when you can apply for them. So just like I mentioned, you know, IP funding is likely to reopen in BC for the spring. So that means early in 2025, you know, you want to start thinking, what projects would I like to fund? What are my IP needs? So that when that opens, you are ready to apply. And so it's very, very important to create that roadmap, understand your current needs and your future needs. Most grants are not taps of money that you can just turn on or turn off. They take months. And so from the time you apply to the time you get it can be weeks, or, you know, the longest that I've been involved in is 18 months. So it can be a very long time. And generally, as a general rule, kind of that timeline scales with the amount of money that you're going after. There are three things you need to consider in your framework. So it's projects and initiatives. What are you spending money on? So it's all about the activities that you're doing. It's not about your core business. And so what are you doing in your business? And we're going to talk about a list of fundable activities in a second. Timelines, it's necessary to understand that. And then the way you win grants is by understanding how the activities that you're doing in your business benefit Canada. And so looking at the government's priorities and the ways in which they're trying to promote grants and what benefits they're looking to spark in Canada would give you a good idea of how you should align your strategy. These are very important questions to ask yourself about whether or not you're grant ready. Is your business incorporated? Are you generating revenue? How much revenue did you make in the past 12 months? Do you have, or are you hiring employees on payroll? So that's those T4 employees I keep mentioning. And do you have access to capital? Can you go to the next one, please? So it is really important to understand those because those are all the things you need to be really, really ready. And so if you're hiring in the next 12 months, you need to start asking yourself how many hires, what positions. Then from there, you can understand which of those positions is going to be grant fundable and what are the timelines that you need to apply for those. Are you exporting beyond Canada? Are you investing in research and development? Are you doing innovation? There are tax credits for that. If you are doing this in Canada, if you're doing R&D in Canada or innovation in Canada, you can get up to 55% of your costs back at tax time. So definitely worth pursuing. And what technologies and projects are you focused on, and are you training your team? And again, always bringing this back to how does this benefit Canada? Am I creating jobs? Am I reducing greenhouse gas emissions? What are we doing within your business that will help you access these grants? Tip 2, don't be afraid of partnerships and consortia. I can't stress this enough. There are so many grants where, like MyTax that I mentioned, you do need to partner with the university lab. The supercluster grants love a consortia. I've personally been a part of some really large consortium projects, and they are fantastic. You get access to people and skills and advice and tools and techniques that you wouldn't otherwise get access to. At the same time, group projects, we've all done them. And so, there is that element of them to be cautious of. But all in all, I would say they are great opportunities to really expand your reach and notoriety of your company, all sorts of reasons to get involved as a small to medium-sized business or startup into consortium and partnerships. Tip 3, building relationships proactively with funders. So IREP is a great example of that. We always say as soon as you are IREP ready, get an ITA and then tell your ITA what you're going to do and then do it and show them. The more that you can show that you do what you say you're going to do, the more support that they're going to give you. We even had our ITA tell us one time, I did not think you guys were going to be as successful as you are. But I'm pleasantly surprised, which we took really well. And he's been, like I said, nothing but extremely supportive. And for those larger programs, super clusters, those big government loans, calling up the funder and saying, I'd like to talk about my project before I go and invest 20, 40 hours, or before I hire a grant writer to help take that load of the 40 or 80 hours it's going to take to access this millions. Do I have a good shot? Can I talk to somebody on your team? We really recommend that. Most grants, especially those larger, juicier ones that will take up more of your resources, they're very, very willing to get on the phone with you and ask questions. Always stack. So as a general rule, of course, there are exceptions to this, but as a general rule, you can actually stack funding. So you can stack provincial and federal funding. So generally, you want to look for 2 different funding sources. Sometimes those are stackable. So if you're going after one, you might as well go after a couple. Final tip of the day, you have 2 choices, do the work or hire someone to do the work. We always recommend hiring a grant writer if you're busy, it's your first time, or the funding program is large and complex. It's really disappointing to kind of go through the process, put in 80 hours of work, and then figure out that you kind of missed a form or something and are disqualified. We have several funding solutions here at Pocketed. Of course, we have our Pocketed software, our platform. It's a self-serve solution for grant-ready companies. Again, there'll be a code for free access to our software coming up shortly. Concierge, where for highly eligible companies, we will help you find, source, and apply for those programs. And then grant writing. And so even if you're not using our software or you're not subscribed to any of our tiers, we are here to offer grant writing support. It is available to everybody, so please reach out. I'm going to go over very, very quickly a couple of funding case studies because I do see some questions coming in, both in the chat and the Q&A. Please put them in the Q&A for a better chance of getting them responded to. So I will do these pretty quickly. So grants can start when you're very small. So this was a SaaS company, so software as a service technology company, and they pursued IP funding and a couple more things. They actually got $6,000 in market expansion funding, so that can go to a conference, do market research into a new country. And they're currently pursuing an additional $25,000 in IP funding with us. They have 9 employees. They're based in Ontario. It can also get bigger. And so there is a company that we love to support, and they help make the immigration process in Canada easier. They have secured already $10,000 in IP funding. They're pursuing another 25,000. Like I said, you can really add these things up to a total of 100,000 per company. You can do those over time. They're doing that SR&ED claim, that tax credit for innovation and research. And they're also pursuing awards. Awards can be good, like kind of a double whammy, honestly, where you get notoriety, you win this award, you get to put that on your website. Usually the awarding body does a lot of PR for you, and you get money. So we do have a lot of awards and competitions on our platform as well for exactly that reason. So please maximize your funding journey, access the IP funding, access all of those great programs. If you would like to make a free account today, you can use the referral code IP Hustle 2024, all one word, when you sign up, and you will get a free access to the basic tier of our platform. So thank you guys very much. We also see that we have the links and code that are copy and pastable in the chat. And we can go to some questions. Jen, I think this one's for you, but it says, how can startups protect themselves if they bring on interns through school programs where students earn credit for the time they spent working on your project? They sign an NDA and the school signs an NDA releasing any rights to the product. What happens if your application grows to a large valuation and you decide to sell it?
Yeah, Ari, I was trying to answer in writing as you were completing your presentation. I wasn't done, so I'll answer orally.
Okay.
Typically not a problem. And then in my written response, I had if in all capital letters. If done properly, that means two things. Typically, you need, and I'm talking Mitacs grants and probably others as well, you do need an agreement directly with the university that will assign the IP developed by the student to you. You need that. A lot of these grants will say, hey, we don't get involved with IP, call the institution. The grant documentation is not sufficient. You need an agreement directly with the institution. And that's for project IP. So in that agreement, we're going to define what's the scope of the project, what contribution the student is supposed to have. So I typically have the student sign as well the standard IP assignment of the company, just in case he or she contributes to something else. Because a lot of these grants will allow students, like Mitacs is one of them, the student will go into industry. He's going to be working with you. And you know what? You may be working on stuff that are unrelated to the project, and that student may chime in. Hey, sorry, I overheard you saying ABC. Have you tried ABC, A and B and C prime? Hey, student, that's a great idea. Well, he may be sorry. He may be an inventor to something that had nothing to do with the project. So two agreements, one with the university, one with the student directly, and you're good to go. That was tough.
Sounds great. Thank you. Can give us an update on the recent resuscitation of SDTC under the NRC IRAP banner. Are they operational, and are they taking applications? Great question. Yeah, that was a huge change for SDTC. They've been around for over 25 years, and they are now working under ISED under the similar banners to the to IRAP, which also recently moved. They are coming back. No, they're not currently accepting applications, but we anticipate that they will be open soon. So stay tuned. Keep monitoring that. By going onto our website and hearting on the platform, if you click the heart on any of the programs, you'll get emails about those programs as soon as there are changes made. And so we do monitor all of the grants every single day. It is a big job. And so if you don't want to miss out, definitely like that grant, and it will be saved and you'll get emails about those updates. But they are operational and they are coming back soon. And then there's a general question here about how can we schedule an exploratory call to discuss programs. We will put our email address in here and you can reach out via email, especially if you met those eligibility criteria where you're incorporated, you're hiring, you're generating revenue, you have T4 employees, you're spending money on projects, you are going to be eligible for some grants. And so we would love to talk to you, of course. We also, once you sign up for the platform, you can get access to our free office hours, which run all the time. And so we're happy to talk to you there as well. But please do send us an email. The email is hello@hellopocketed.io, and we will put that in the chat here. Any other questions? That's the ones I see through the Q&A. But we probably can stay on for one more minute. Yeah, thank you for putting that in there. That's great. All right. Oh, and I see that Jan actually answered one question here, so I can just read it out. Are there similar tools as the ones for patent searches for trademarking and copywriting? Also, Jane did respond to this. For copywriting, not really. It's not as relevant since you just can't copy it, so that does make sense. And do you want to talk a little bit about the trademarking search tools?
Yeah, so very rapidly, when I was talking about patent landscaping tools, the question was, does something similar exist for copyright and trademarks? Copyright rarely an issue because you literally need to copy someone else's work to have a problem. If you're generating your own stuff, no copyright problem at all. And copyright does not protect concepts and ideas. So unless you're copying someone else's work, like literally stealing code, as an example, you're good on copyright. For trademarks, there exists tools, but typically they will be used by professionals to help you assess if your brand can be used and registered, and they are specific to different countries because the laws are different. So trademark availability in the US doesn't necessarily mean the same thing in Europe or UK. So these tools are, the algorithms take care of these specificities, typically used by professionals. So they do exist. Just reach out to a professional at one point. Especially if you have these grants, great way to spend that money in a meaningful way for your company.
Awesome. I see there are a couple more questions and hands. Unfortunately, I think we are out of time. Jane, do you want to answer this last one super quickly? When working with fashion, so clothing design, are there any IP types to prioritize other than trademarks?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Fashion is not easy. 2D designs protected by copyright. So if you literally draw something and someone steals the drawing and generate a 3D article based on the 2D drawing, then yes, there's copyright infringement. The patterns, flowers in like a painting, but the garment itself, if it has a specific design and I see it on a shell and I copy that, very hard to do anything about it, unless somehow somewhere you can get an industrial design, which is hard in the world of fashion. So fashion, not that easy actually from an IP perspective. Good question. Sorry, I didn't have a better answer.
No, that was great. We really appreciate everybody's attendance here. Thank you, JN, for joining us. We really appreciate your time and energy today and answering all of these very specific questions. Thank you very much, everybody. Make it a count. Thank you. Bye.